I'm Harper Quinn, 48 years old, retired Major General, United States Army, 3 combat tours, 6 funeral flags folded by my own hands, and a chest full of medals I never display. But nothing felt colder than the moment I walked into my own mother's birthday dinner and realized I was invisible. It hit me the second I stepped through the arched mahogany doors of the Garrison Club. The place was marble and brass, dripping in old money. You could smell the privilege in the air, Chanel No. 5 truffle oil, and the disinfectant they used to keep the poor out. A few heads turned when I entered, and then, just as quickly, they turned back, like I was a service worker who had come in through the wrong door. "Quinn party?" the hostess asked, barely glancing up from her tablet. I nodded. She didn't smile, didn't welcome me, just turned on her heel like I was delivering a late FedEx box, not showing up for my own mother's 65th birthday. She led me down a long hallway lined with portraits of dead white men who probably signed discriminatory policies with gold-plated pens. I kept pace silently, heels echoing behind her, adjusting the cuffs of the only decent coat I owned. I'd debated wearing my dress uniform. Part of me wanted them to see the stars, the ribbons, the sacrifice, but I knew better. That family didn't honor service, not mine. When we reached the private room, I paused. There it was, the glittering stage for a story I didn't belong in. Crystal glasses, white linens, laughter that cut too sharp. The sign above the grand floral centerpiece read Margaret Quinn, 65 years of grace. Funny, grace was the one thing she never extended to me. I spotted my father, Charles Quinn, dead center of the table, bourbon in hand, a retired judge with the emotional warmth of cold steel. His posture was as polished as ever. But his eyes, they landed on me like I was a typo. He didn't stand, didn't smile, just gave me that half smirk he used when I was 13 and tracked mud into his study. No one moved, not a cousin, not an aunt, not even a nod. One person glanced at me, then leaned closer to her date, like I hadn't just crossed an ocean of silence to get there. The only open seat was tucked behind a massive vase of white orchids and dyed eucalyptus, shoved near the swinging kitchen door. Every time it flapped open, I caught whiffs of bleach, garlic, and the resignation of underpaid staff. The hostess gestured vaguely toward it and vanished. I stood there a beat too long, then sat. The chair wobbled. Something sticky clung to the hem of my coat beneath the table. I folded my napkin into a tight square, hands needing a mission. Across from me sat the mayor's wife. She didn't look up. She was laughing at something Emily had just said. Of course. Emily. The golden child. The walking press release. My baby sister. They didn't even notice me arrive because they were too busy listening to Emily talk about her latest community initiative, New Horizons, which, if I'm being honest, sounds like a rehab center for burned-out donors. But it's a nonprofit, and she knows how to smile, the kind of smile that earns 6-figure grants from people who own media companies. I listened for a full 5 minutes before anyone even acknowledged me. And when they did, still unemployed. Huh. That came from my father. Said loud enough for the table to hear. Said without even turning his head. I didn't flinch. Retired, I replied evenly, looking straight ahead. Major General. He chuckled into his glass. From what logistics? Like I'd driven trucks. Like I hadn't spent 2 decades making decisions that cost men their lives and saved others. 23 years, 5 continents, 6 combat funerals, and none of it translated into this family's language. Someone near the far end of the table muttered something about government pensions. Another guest snorted. I clenched my water glass, counting heartbeats. And then the room shifted. Not for me. For her. Emily entered like a red curtain on opening night. Waves of blonde hair curled just so. Crimson silk dress. one shoulder bare, heels that made a precise click-click on the marble. The room turned to her like she was gravity. Applause rose, yes, actual applause. Margaret Quinn, my mother stood, arms open, beaming. "My baby," she called out. She hadn't stood for me. "I'm so proud of you," she added, loud enough for the waitstaff to hear. Then she turned to the crowd. "Emily has been working so hard with her nonprofit. It's changing lives." A champagne glass was raised. Emily smiled like she'd rehearsed it. "It's an honor to serve this community," she said smoothly, "and we're just getting started." More applause. A brief hug with the mayor. No one asked what I had been doing for the past 20 years. No one mentioned the Valor Cross. No one knew about Logan Miles, or what I'd lost, or what I'd done. I stared through my glass, watching the chandelier light fracture, warped reflections, faces I didn't belong to. And I just sat there, behind the flowers, chewing silent bites of filet mignon, counting the number of times the server refilled Emily's glass before even looking my way. That's when my cousin began talking about how some ex-officers wind up scanning barcodes at Target. "Not kidding," he said. "My buddy's brother used to be in the Marines. Now he hands out carts at Costco." Laughter. I let it wash over me, let it sting, let it burn. I didn't speak, didn't break. But then, it happened. Just as dessert was being served, a delicate lemon tart with raspberry drizzle, a voice sliced through the hum of conversation. Firm, clear, military. "Major General Quinn, welcome home, ma'am." The room froze. Forks stopped midair. Champagne bubbles hung in silence. Emily's head whipped around. My mother's hand trembled. A woman near me dropped her spoon into her wine glass. I turned. A man stood at the edge of the table, mid-30s, maybe early 40s. Sharp build, dress uniform, eyes steady, back straight. He didn't ask what I used to be. He already knew. "Major General Quinn," he said again, then gave a crisp nod. I rose before I knew I had, years of instinct taking over. "Thank you," I replied, my voice low, steady, dry. He nodded once more and walked away. But the moment, it stayed. It sliced clean through every fake smile, every forced laugh, every lie this family told itself. The room exhaled, and I finally breathed in. To be continued. The silence didn't fade. It fractured, like a mirror cracking from the center. Too quiet to hear, but impossible to ignore. Everyone saw it, heard it, felt it. That title, Major General, landed like a grenade on the linen-draped table, and no one could pretend they hadn't heard it, not even my mother. She froze with her fork midair, a bite of lemon tart trembling, her lips pressed together like she wanted to say something gracious, maybe even salvage the moment, but she didn't, because anything she could have said would have exposed the years she spent pretending I was someone forgettable. I stayed standing a moment longer, not for the drama, for control. I wanted to feel the weight of that silence, let them sit with the truth they'd buried beneath champagne and curated family photos. Then I sat back down, slowly, deliberately. The room exhaled, awkward laughs resumed, and someone made a weak joke about protocol. But the temperature had changed. You could feel it in the way shoulders shifted, and the sideways glances passed like secrets. I reached for my water, hand steady, but inside, I was burning. And not with pride, with grief. Because I shouldn't have needed a stranger to acknowledge my existence in a room full of blood relatives. That kind of pain. It's surgical, clean cuts, no anesthesia. My father leaned over toward my mother, whispered something sharp and quick. She nodded once. Her expression locked somewhere between damage control and denial. Meanwhile, Emily looked like she'd just been slapped with a newspaper in front of her donors. Her lips parted slightly, half gasp, half calculation. She recovered quickly. "Well," she said, laughing thinly, "what a lovely surprise. Harper, you didn't say you were still in touch with whoever that was." There it was, the casual erasure, as if I didn't know him, as if he hadn't called me by rank. In uniform, with intention. I looked her dead in the eye. I didn't have to. He knew where to find me. Her smile flickered. She turned back to her plate, pushing raspberries around like they offended her. Dessert went on. People whispered. Some tried to pivot conversation, talking loudly about real estate, stocks, committee boards. But the atmosphere was no longer theirs to control. I'd been reinserted into the narrative, and they didn't know how to edit me out again without looking ungrateful or unpatriotic. Which was ironic because they had spent years doing just that. See? My mother's version of family success was clean, marketable, feminine. Emily was perfect for that. Blonde, poised, deeply photogenic. She gave TED-style talks about hope through community engagement. She wore pearls and never talked about trauma. I wore scars, and mine didn't photograph well. But here's the part: no one in that room knew Emily and I weren't just sisters. We were rivals before we were even teenagers. She learned early that if she cried in front of guests, she was sensitive. I learned that if I cried, I was too emotional for a girl. When she won a poetry award, it got framed. When I won a state wrestling title, they forgot to show up. And now, decades later, nothing had changed, except this time, a stranger had said my rank out loud. And that ruined their script. After the cake, a 7-layer monstrosity with gold leaf and a sculpted rose garden on top, people began to leave. The mayor kissed my mother's cheek. Board members gave Emily lingering hugs. No one approached me. Until him. The man from earlier. He waited until the room was nearly empty, standing just near the window, posture still sharp. "Ma'am," he said softly, "I'm sorry for the intrusion. I didn't mean to disrupt the event." I shook my head. "You didn't." "You don't remember me, do you?" he asked. I studied his face. Hazel eyes, faint scar above his brow, steady voice. There was something familiar in the way he squared his shoulders, like he'd been trained not just to stand, but to endure. "Should I asked. "No, ma'am, but I remember you." He extended a hand. "Lieutenant Nathan Cross. I served with Captain Logan Miles, Kandahar, 2010. My chest tightened. That name Logan hit like an aftershock. "Logan was under your command." He continued. "He spoke about you a lot. Said you took the fall when he should have been court-martialed." I stared at him. "He wrote to my sister before he died," Nathan added. Voice soft. "Told her about the letter you wrote from the hospital. Said he'd still be in prison if it hadn't been for you." I swallowed hard. That letter. I hadn't thought about it in years. I'd written it with my dominant arm shattered, fingers stitched, morphine buzzing in my veins. I'd taken full responsibility for a mission decision that saved lives, but broke protocol, because I knew Logan wouldn't survive the investigation. The Army buried the report. I was reassigned stateside. Logan stayed in the field. Until he didn't. "I didn't know," I said quietly. Nathan nodded. No one did. But I found a copy of the letter. Logan forwarded it to someone before he died. I've kept it. I thought maybe someday I'd get to thank you. We stood there in the quiet. Everything else faded. "How did you know I'd be here tonight?" I finally asked. He smiled faintly. "Your sister's event flyer listed your mother's birthday dinner. Public calendar for the nonprofit." Of course, Emily had probably posted it for networking. Nathan cleared his throat. "Look, I know this is personal, and I don't want to intrude further, but there's a veterans gathering next weekend. Informal. Mostly former combat medics and junior officers. They'd want to hear from someone like you." I almost laughed. Someone like me. someone who remembers what loyalty looks like. I didn't commit to anything. But that night, after the last Uber pulled away and the valet stand shut its lights, I found myself walking down the quiet street, heels in hand, moonlight cutting across the sidewalk like chalk lines. When I got back to my motel, I opened the rickety wardrobe that smelled like damp linen and old dust. Inside was a metal lockbox. I hadn't opened it in over a decade. Hands trembling, I popped it open. There it was. The letter. Still folded, still stained. And tucked inside it, the Valor Cross. I ran my fingers over the ribbon. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel ashamed of it. I felt angry. And anger. Anger is clarity. To be continued. I didn't sleep that night. The motel room was quiet, too quiet, the kind that lets old memories breathe too loudly. I sat at the desk for hours, the letter in metal lying in front of me like evidence in a trial no one else would witness. I read every word again, slow, as if it could change this time. It didn't. The paper was creased, yellowed along the fold. There were small blood specks I'd never noticed before. Maybe mine, maybe Logan's. Hard to say. The letter was short formal. Like all military statements, I took full accountability for the command decision that pulled our unit out of the village early. Logan had warned me that enemy movements were shifting, that staying would have meant civilian casualties. I trusted his gut. We left. Protocol said stay. We left. And when the brass asked who gave the order, I did what any good officer does for the people under their command. I lied. I paid for that lie with a reassignment, a note in my file, and a career that hit its ceiling faster than it should have. Logan paid with his life 6 months later in a different desert, different bullets, same silence. But I wasn't angry about that. I was angry because my family knew none of it. And they didn't care. Emily had been paraded for leading food drives and fundraising galas. Meanwhile, I had disappeared from our family narrative like a stain they didn't know how to scrub. They didn't know about the letter, or the scar along my shoulder, or the time I held a dying soldier's hand and promised him I'd get his dog tags home. To them, I was Harper the difficult one. Harper who didn't fit. Harper who couldn't hold a job after retirement. No one ever asked why I left the Army early, because they didn't want the answer. The next morning, I packed the medal and letter into a small box and slipped it into my bag. Not to display, not yet, but I knew I'd need them soon. I stopped by a coffee shop near the Veterans Affairs building, ordered black coffee, and sat near the back. I texted Nathan. Meet me, 1 hour. He showed up in 40 minutes. Dressed in plain clothes, this time jeans, flannel shirt, jacket. His posture still screamed military, but his tone was gentler. You okay? He asked, sliding into the seat across from me. I've had worse, I said. He nodded like he knew that already. I pushed the box toward him. I want this read aloud. He opened it, took in the letter, the medal, the silent weight between the two. At the gathering, he asked, No, bigger. He blinked. How much bigger? I leaned in. Emily is speaking at the statewide Veterans Forum in 10 days. It's a media event. Her nonprofit is sponsoring it. His mouth tightened. And you want? I want the truth aired in the same room where she's built her image. He shook his head slowly. Harper, that's not just about her. That's national press. Corporate sponsors. She built a career off the language of service, sacrifice, duty, integrity. Those are words she's never bled for. Nathan looked down at the medal again. People will listen, he said quietly. They'd better, I replied, because if they don't hear it from me, they'll hear it from every woman who was told she was too aggressive for leadership, every soldier labeled unstable for grieving, every daughter who was expected to smile while her family applauded the wrong sibling. He met my eyes. You're not just angry. I'm awake. That afternoon, I made another stop. Paul Hernandez, documentary filmmaker, freelance, lanky guy with nervous eyes but a sharp brain. He'd been at the birthday dinner hired by Emily's PR team to record the night for a family legacy reel. When I called, he hesitated, said he couldn't just hand over footage. I said, "I'm in it." He hesitated again. "I'm the only person they never looked at, but I'm in it. You've got the whole night on film faces." Words. The moment I was called by rank, and no one applauded. "You have it." He agreed to meet. We sat on folding chairs in his editing studio, lit only by the glow of a monitor. He clicked through clips until we reached the part. There it was. Emily posing with donors. My mother's speech. My father's snide remark. And then, the moment Nathan said, "Major General Quinn." The camera caught it. The way my mother stiffened. The way my name felt like a pebble dropped in a crystal glass. Paul sat back. I didn't even notice this moment the first time. "That's because it wasn't meant to be seen," I said. Then I asked him a favor. A bold one. I wanted him to splice together a video 10 minutes, just enough to show contrast. Emily's shining speech about inclusion and support for veterans, cross-cut with the silence that followed my recognition, my family's blank stares, the hush, my father's joke about logistics. He looked nervous. "I don't want to tank my relationship with Emily's team." "Then don't put your name on it." He hesitated. But then, he nodded. 10 minutes, drop-style cut, silent in all the right places. I smiled. That night, I booked a train to D.C. I still hadn't told Emily, but she was about to find out. Because the real war, it never ends with a salute. It starts when the truth refuses to stay buried. To be continued. The Amtrak train pulsed beneath me like a second heartbeat. I stared out the window as towns blurred past rusted silos, cracked roads, cheap motels with neon signs missing letters. The kind of places you forget existed unless you're running toward something. Or away from everything. The box sat wedged beneath my feet, wrapped in a wool scarf like it might bruise if touched wrong. Inside the letter, the Valor Cross, and every ounce of silence I'd carried for 23 years. I wasn't just going to D.C. I was going to war. This one didn't involve bullets or sand. It was carpeted in corporate slogans and soft applause. But the damage it left was no less real. The statewide Veterans Forum was being held at the Marriott Capitol View, a space more polished than honest, where every chandelier sparkle was meant to distract from what wasn't being said. Emily's nonprofit was one of the major co-sponsors. Her face was everywhere, printed on programs, projected on monitors, smiling with conviction she didn't earn. There was no mention of me. I checked into a no-frills hotel 4 blocks away, cheap enough to ignore, close enough to strike. The bed creaked. The carpet smelled like old carpet. I slept in my boots. The next day, I walked into the venue under a gray blazer, clipboard in hand, looking like just another exhausted event staffer. It's amazing what people ignore when you act like you belong. I scoped the place entrance paths, side doors, the media booth. Then I found the AV station. 2 tech guys, college age, half focused on plugging HDMI cables, half texting. "Excuse me," I said, calm but firm. We had a late addition to the family tribute reel, segment for one of the donor's sisters. Should have been uploaded, but wasn't. They didn't ask for ID, just shrugged. "You got it on a drive." I handed over Paul's USB. 10 minutes. Real short. Her family's flying in for the segment. So if it glitches, well, you know how those emails go. They nodded, too tired to care. He previewed the first frame. Emily's birthday party. Champagne glasses. Her hugging the mayor. Confetti-level warmth. Perfect. I walked away. That night, I laid out my uniform like armor, polished every pin, lined the Valor Cross dead center on my chest. I hadn't worn it in public since Afghanistan. But tomorrow, it wouldn't just be a medal. It would be a mirror. The ballroom buzzed with caffeine and talking points. Suits everywhere. Some real vets. Others just veterans of boardrooms and brunch committees. I slipped into the second row and sat like a ghost there, but unacknowledged. Until Emily took the stage. Pearl earrings, cream blazer, every word polished like a PR release. She talked about unsung heroes, service and silence, and building community through courage. If hypocrisy had a sound, it would have been that applause. Then she said, with a practiced smile, "We'd now like to share a brief video tribute to those whose service stories haven't always made the headlines, but should have." The lights dimmed. The screen glowed. At first, it was standard fluff, Emily giving a speech, toasts, donors laughing, her handing out awards to elderly veterans and gripping their hands just a second too long for the cameras. Then the cut happened. A hard transition. Silence. A still frame of me, tucked behind that ridiculous floral arrangement at the birthday party. Then Major General Quinn, "Welcome home." Nathan's voice. The room on screen froze, just like the one I sat in now. My father's smirk, my mother's stunned eyes. No one clapped. Cut again to Paul's interview footage. My voice, low, clear. They say valor is its own reward, but silence isn't honor, it's erasure. There were audible exhales in the audience. The screen faded to black. "Lights up?" Emily looked like someone had just pulled the stage out from under her. Her hands trembled slightly, trying to adjust the mic, but no words came out. Then she saw me. I stood. Full dress uniform, metal gleaming, posture straight as ever. The room didn't make a sound. Until I walked forward. No security moved, no moderator interrupted. Even the AV techs looked frozen. I didn't take the mic. I didn't need amplification. "My name is Major General Harper Quinn," I said, voice cutting through the air like a whistle at boot camp. "I served this country for 23 years, not for applause, but not to be erased, either." Eyes turned, phones lifted. See? Families love to talk about service as long as it looks good on a brochure. But the real kind, the hard kind, the kind that stains you, it's too inconvenient for dinner parties. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. My sister built a reputation on the sacrifices of others. She speaks of duty, but she's never once asked me what mine cost. My eyes locked on hers. And that silence ends today. I turned and walked out. And that's when it started. A single pair of hands clapped behind me, then more, then more. It wasn't a standing ovation. It wasn't loud, but it was real. And as I passed the lobby, my phone buzzed. Text from Paul. "They just pulled Emily from the final panel. You want this video online?" I stared at the screen, thought of my mother's silence, my father's disdain, every handshake Emily had ever stolen. I typed one word. Upload. Then I stepped into the sun. To be continued. The video went live at 9:07 a.m. By 9:32, it had 12,000 views. At 10:04, Emily's team issued a vague press release, calling it unauthorized archival footage and promising a full internal review. By noon, 3 local news anchors were asking on Twitter, "Who is Major General Harper Quinn?" And for the first time in my life, my name was being spoken without shame. Not by family, not by pity, but by people who understood silence wasn't neutral, it was complicit. I stayed in my motel room. Lights off, blinds drawn. The Valor Cross was on the desk. I didn't wear it now. It had already done what it needed to do. This wasn't about medals anymore. It was about memory, Correction. It was about correction. Then the texts started coming in. First, from journalists, then former soldiers, then strangers. One read, "Ma'am, I served under Lieutenant Miles in Sangin. I saw what he wrote about you in his journal. Thank you for saving his life. He saved ours." Another, "I'm 23. My dad never talks about Afghanistan. Today he forwarded me your video. Said, this is what real leadership looks like." But then came the text I hadn't expected. From my mother. 4 words. "We need to talk." I didn't respond. Not right away. Because part of me thought, after all this, now she wants a conversation. What was left to say? She saw me bleed for a country. She saw me hide the truth so my sister could stay comfortable. She saw everything and said nothing. Still, I met her. Neutral ground, a cafe near Union Station, big windows, too many succulents, expensive coffee that tasted like wet bark. She was already seated, hair perfect, lipstick flawless, a gold scarf wrapped around her throat like armor. The moment she saw me, she stood. "Harper," she began. I held up a hand. "No speeches." She nodded, sat back down. There was a pause, long and brittle. "Finally," she said, "you embarrassed Emily." I blinked, then laughed, low and sharp. "That's what this is about, her image." "No," she said quickly. "It's about our name. Your father is—" I leaned in, dead to me. That shut her up. I was erased from my own family. I continued. "And you were the one holding the eraser." Her hands curled around her coffee cup like she might snap it. "We thought we were protecting you," she said. I stared. From what I asked, from recognition, from being seen, or from outshining your golden child. Tears welled up, but not in me. My mother, the woman who never cried, not even when we buried my grandfather, was cracking. I was scared. She whispered, of what it meant, to have a daughter who killed people, who came home broken. I didn't flinch. "Newsflash," I said, "your other daughter is broken too, just prettier at hiding it." Silence again. Only this time, I wasn't uncomfortable with it. She finally looked up. Her voice was barely audible. "Why now?" I didn't hesitate. Because truth doesn't rot. It waits. And then I left her there alone, clutching the latte she never drank. That evening, Nathan called. "We have a situation," he said. "What kind?" "Emily's nonprofit board is in freefall. Half the sponsors are pulling out. They're scrambling to find someone to clean house. A new face." I frowned. "You're not asking?" He interrupted. "No, I'm inviting." "Inviting me to what?" "To take the space she never deserved." I was quiet. "Harper," he said, "we're starting a coalition, Veterans for Truth. Real stories, real people. We need a voice that isn't afraid to speak before the cameras are rolling." I looked across the motel room, the box, the ribbon, the letter, then at myself. For years, I'd been taught humility was silence. But maybe real humility was speaking with purpose and letting your wounds breathe air. I said yes. The announcement went live 2 days later, and I didn't just trend. I became a mirror. To every woman who was passed over, to every soldier misremembered, to every daughter told she was too much. But just when I thought the battle was won, something landed in my inbox. An anonymous email. No subject line. One attachment. A PDF. I opened it, and my heart stopped. Because it was a redacted Army Tribunal file. One with my name and Emily's name. Same page. Same event. Except this version told a story I hadn't known. And suddenly, everything changed. To be continued. The document stared back at me like a silent confession. My hands were cold, my pulse, a slow drumbeat of dread. I enlarged the PDF and leaned in. It was an internal Army Tribunal memo redacted. Yes, but not enough. Dated 12 years ago. Subject line, unauthorized access to operational intel JAG preliminary review. 2 names on the witness list. Mine. And Emily's. I felt the floor shift beneath me, even though I hadn't moved. I read on. The report detailed a breach of a restricted server classified operational data had been accessed in the weeks before a rescheduled airlift. A civilian had used a vet's login to review upcoming extraction logistics. The logs were traced, quietly investigated, buried under mitigated consequence and non-hostile intent. But here's what turned my stomach. The login used. It was mine. Except I'd never logged in that day. I was out on base, in a convoy. Someone had used my credentials. And somehow, it connected to Emily, a civilian contractor. It said, temporarily authorized to assist a senior officer in compiling nonprofit narratives. That officer was my then commander, a friend of my father's. I sat back in my motel chair, breath shallow. I stared at the name of the adjudicating officer, now retired. The case was quietly closed. They'd covered it. She had accessed restricted intel, and when the heat came, they used my name to mop it up. And that's why I was reassigned. That's why my career never recovered. She hadn't just erased me from family dinners. She'd weaponized my uniform. And the system protected her because, like always, she knew the right people. It wasn't a mistake. It was a strategy. I paced the room like a storm trapped in 4 walls. That old anger wasn't just back. It had grown teeth. I called Nathan. He picked up on the first ring. I need you to look something up, I said, quietly and fast. Tell me. I forwarded him the PDF. He went silent for a beat. Then, where did you get this? Anonymous drop, I said. Probably someone from JAG who saw the video and wanted to clear their conscience. He blew out a breath. This changes everything. Not yet, I said. We don't go public, not until we verify it. 2 hours later, he called back. It's real. I had a friend at Records cross-reference login data from that base. You weren't on base the day the access occurred. You were confirmed en route to the Kandahar drop site. And Emily. She was listed on the guest roster for a donor tour that week. No official clearance. I closed my eyes. She used my name to snoop, to build her portfolio. And when it triggered a red flag, someone up top, maybe my commander, swept it under by tacking it to my record. Sacrifice, they called it. Integrity. They stole both from me. Nathan asked, "What do you want to do?" My voice was steel. We go public, but not through the media. I had something else in mind. The Veterans for Truth Coalition was scheduled to hold its first live panel in Baltimore in 48 hours. It would be live-streamed, press-free, vet-run, no handlers, just stories, real ones. I called Paul, the filmmaker. Can you shoot something in the next 6 hours? He laughed. Lady, you could ask me to film a lightning strike and I'd try. We met in an empty auditorium downtown. No lighting setup, just the bare stage, a folding chair, and silence. He asked no questions, just hit record. I sat, Valor Cross pinned to my jacket, and I told the truth. The full truth. About the day I took responsibility for a call that saved lives but broke protocol. About how my career was restructured. And then, about the login, the betrayal, the sister I defended publicly while she undermined me privately. I didn't name names, but the story told itself. I ended with this. Honor isn't the absence of failure. It's the refusal to hide. If the cost of telling the truth is losing what little reputation I have left, so be it. At least this time. The wound is honest. The clip was added to the livestream roster. Meanwhile, Emily went quiet. For the first time in her curated career, She didn't post a single word, not even a quote. But someone else did. A comment under one of the YouTube videos, unverified account, no profile picture. There's more, much more, and I have it all. I clicked the username. It was brand new. One post. A file directory. Encrypted. Labeled the Quinn Archive. I stared at the directory titled The Quinn Archive. It felt like opening a vault that had waited 2 decades for the right hands. No password, no encryption, just a slow-loading page filled with scanned letters, field memos, redacted reports and audio logs, time-stamped, real, raw. One file caught my eye, OPKH-47 debrief, uncut. I clicked. A man's voice, tired and gravelly, filled the room. This recording's off record, but it needs to exist. I recognized the voice immediately. Lieutenant Colonel David Wells, my former commanding officer, the man who'd reassigned me quietly after the incident. I was instructed to file disciplinary against Major Harper Quinn. He said, but I refused. The real story didn't match the one JAG wanted. My chest tightened. He continued. Someone accessed evac protocols using her credentials. That someone wasn't her. I knew it. She was 50 miles out on convoy that day. But the order came from higher up: seal it, bury it, sacrifice the career. Family didn't want heat. I froze. Family, not command. Not military pressure. Family. And then came the line that changed the entire landscape of my memory. It was her sister, Emily, got into a staffer's computer at the donor mixer, said she needed narrative inspiration for a speech. She found the schedule. She wasn't supposed to see it, but she printed it, used it to pitch a program. The air left my lungs. She left a trace. He said, she always left traces. But no one wanted to hold her accountable, not when her father was on the advisory board. So the fallout landed on Harper. Click. The audio ended. I sat in silence, the same way I had for years, only this time, not out of fear, out of fire. For decades, I'd thought the silence around my service was about discomfort, shame, even generational blindness. But no, it was ambition. Emily hadn't just betrayed me. She'd built her empire on the backs of men and women she mined for content. And when she slipped, when her hunger got messy, my uniform became her cleanup crew. And our parents helped her cover it. Because she was the one who smiled prettier in photo ops. I released the files. Not all at once. Just enough. Paul stitched them into a follow-up documentary. Shorter this time. Tighter. Brutal in its clarity. No commentary, just receipts. It went viral. And when the National Nonprofit Watchdog launched their investigation, Emily resigned. Quietly, without an apology. But that wasn't the closure. Not for me. The real closure came weeks later. At a small VFW hall in rural Pennsylvania. I was speaking at a panel, nothing fancy, just a circle of chairs and a decent coffee urn. A teenage girl sat in the back, headphones half off, jacket too big for her. Afterward, she approached. My dad always said women didn't belong in the field. She said, then he watched your video. He never said sorry. But he asked me what I wanted to do after high school. I smiled. And I told him I wanted to serve. He didn't fight me this time. That's what healing looks like. Not thunder. But one fence mended, one truth told. One father who learns. Later that night, Nathan texted, they're offering a congressional appearance. You'd testify. I stared at the message. I thought of the young soldiers who never came back, of the women who wore armor under armor, of the battles that weren't fought overseas, but in rooms full of donors and doubts. I typed, yes, but not for revenge, for record. Because this was never about vengeance. It was about memory. It was about putting the truth back where it belonged, inside the record, inside the history, inside the narrative that had always left out the quiet ones. Weeks passed. Emily disappeared from the spotlight. Her foundation rebranded. Her speaking gigs dried up. She retreated, not in disgrace, but in irrelevance. The silence she once imposed had come for her. And I kept speaking, not always loudly, but always truthfully. At schools, on base, in courtrooms. Because here's what I've learned. Silence protects no one but the powerful. And honor without witness is just erosion. So now I wear the Valor Cross not as a symbol of what I did, but of what I refused to bury. And if you're watching this, if you've ever been told to shrink, to smile, to step aside, don't. Not anymore. Your voice might be the only one someone else is waiting to hear. Cliffhanger ended, but the story lives in those who carry it forward. If this story moved, you drop a comment below. Honor someone whose truth was buried. Like, subscribe, and share, because sometimes justice begins with being seen. Story 2. My name is Sophia Hayes. I'm 34 years old, and on the morning of my little brother's promotion ceremony, I stood outside the United States Naval Academy with my hands cold, my spine straight, and a name that apparently no longer belonged. The checkpoint was manned by a young petty officer, probably half my age, his uniform crisp, his eyes sharp. He scanned my government ID, then frowned at his tablet. You could feel the awkward pause before he spoke one of those silences where you already know the answer, but your pride won't let you leave without hearing it aloud. Ma'am, I don't see you on the guest list for Lieutenant Hayes. He rotated the screen toward me like an apology he wasn't authorized to make. I read the names aloud in my head. Captain David Hayes, Margaret Hayes, Jessica Hayes, my brother's wife. That was it. No Sophia. Not a clerical error. Not a mistake. This was intentional erasure. A deletion performed with surgical precision. The petty officer shifted uncomfortably. Would you like to step aside for now while I confirm with the main desk? I didn't answer. Not because I was shocked. No. I had long since stopped giving my family that power. I had expected something like this. Just not like this. Moments later, the family SUV rolled into view, sleek, black, and self-important. And out stepped my brother Ethan, still the golden boy, still tan in a way that didn't match his New England bloodline. His white dress uniform fit like it had been tailored by God himself. He looked every bit the conquering naval officer. He spotted me immediately. He saw the pause at the checkpoint. He saw the confusion on the petty officer's face. And then he smiled that kind of slow, practiced smirk you develop when you've spent your whole life being told you're better. Instead of walking toward me, Ethan turned to Jessica, his picture-perfect wife in her high heels and military chic sheath dress, and said loud enough for both of us and the guard to hear. Probably just a paperwork mix-up. She should have married a real officer instead of pushing spreadsheets. The slap wasn't in his voice. It was in his precision. He knew I would hear him. He intended it. Behind him, my mother busied herself with the clasp of her brooch like it was a bomb she needed to defuse. My father didn't even flinch. He just walked past, his jaw locked, his gaze set forward as if I weren't even there. I wasn't surprised. I had spent a lifetime being the ghost at the family table, the footnote in their story, but something about seeing it unfold in full daylight, with witnesses, with orderlies and military families watching, as I was politely erased, it hit different. I stepped aside. The petty officer nodded, relieved to avoid a scene. My boots clicked once, twice on the pavement as I moved toward the edge of the checkpoint. My face was calm, composed, but beneath the trench coat I wore, my skin felt like it was burning. Inside, beneath that coat, Was the truth a dark Navy uniform with a lieutenant commander's insignia stitched into the shoulders? And more than that, buried deep in my pocket, a flash drive with intel I hadn't yet sent to Joint Command. Because while my brother was out here shining medals and flexing family pride, I was running a pre-dawn op, coordinating a hostage recovery mission off the Red Sea. But, of course, in the Hayes family narrative, I was just the older sister with a desk job. Just wait till you hear what she does. Ethan once said to a colleague at a family party, "She makes PowerPoints about pirates." That day, I had smiled. This day, I didn't. I stood alone on the pristine grounds of Annapolis, watching the ceremony guests trickle in with their polished shoes and tightly choreographed family smiles. Mothers clutching camellia corsages, fathers with their aging service pins proudly gleaming on lapels, and sons and daughters standing tall in dress whites. This was supposed to be my legacy, too. My father had worn his uniform like a second skin. My grandfather before him, too. There were photos dusty and fading of Hayes men on battleships and in war rooms. But nowhere, not in any frame, not in any family album, was a photo of me in uniform. Because I didn't belong to their idea of the military. I wasn't blood and grit and medals. I was algorithms and airless bunkers, databases and drone routes. I didn't kick down doors. I calculated angles so that others didn't have to. They couldn't see it. And because they couldn't see it, they assumed it wasn't real. But it was about to become very, very real. I took a breath and let the air settle in my lungs. Then I walked calmly, precisely back toward the parking lot. I didn't go home. I drove to the secure command site where I worked a concrete tomb buried deep under a communications facility in Virginia. We called it the Tank. No windows, fluorescent light, the hum of servers like a mechanical heartbeat. And that night, as the SEAL team hovered 2 miles off the Somali coast, my voice cut through the static. Viper 1, you are green. Move on target. Bridge thermal scan confirms 7 hostiles. 12 hostages. You have surprise on your side. I repeat, confirm entry in 60 seconds. They moved. I monitored every angle, every heat signature, every elevation change. And when it was done, when 12 civilians were safely airlifted off a hijacked oil tanker, when every pirate was disarmed or dead, my team let out the collective exhale only possible after the impossible has happened. The next day, I saw the headlines. Navy officer commended for heroic negotiation skills. Lieutenant Hayes leads tactical team to victory in rescue mission. Ethan's name was all over the news, smiling for the camera, wearing the uniform like it was blessed. And I was back at the tank, still invisible, still erased, but this time, with all the power in my hands. And that's when I knew this wasn't just personal anymore. It was legacy. It was justice. It was time to make them see what they'd tried so hard to forget. ChatGPT and I, the air that day had tasted too cheerful. The sun danced off the Chesapeake Bay like it didn't know I was about to be humiliated, as I'd crossed the bridge toward Annapolis. I remember thinking how cruel it was, how nature never seemed to match the inner storm. But that wasn't the first time I felt like a ghost at my own family's gathering. That had been happening for decades. You see, the Hayes family didn't ignore me because I failed. They ignored me because I didn't fit their script. Their version of glory had only one acceptable path: boots on the ground, medals on the chest, war stories over whiskey. And I was different. Growing up, I was the quiet child, not shy, just observant. I didn't wrestle in the yard like Ethan or polish Dad's old Navy plaques on Sundays. I spent my afternoons solving logic puzzles, building encryption models on our beat-up Dell, tinkering with homemade code while they praised Ethan's push-up count. I remember the exact day the script became permanent. I was 16. The summer sun baked the grass to a golden crunch, and the backyard was filled with veterans from every branch of the military. My father had thrown a massive barbecue to celebrate Ethan's acceptance into the Naval Academy. Retired officers in white caps clapped him on the back. My mother brought out a giant sheet cake with icing that read, "Congratulations, future Admiral." People treated it like a coronation. I stood there clapping with everyone else. But I might as well have been the tree in the corner holding up the string lights. Nobody noticed me. Nobody asked what I was working on. And the cruel irony, that same week, I had won first place in the National High School Science Fair for a cryptographic security algorithm, a design that would later become the foundation of the Navy's internal data redundancy system. But that day I tried to show my dad the medal. He didn't even put the paper down. "Good job, sweetie," he muttered, eyes locked on the Wall Street Journal. Then he folded the paper, looked at Ethan, and said, "We need to get you started on your summer conditioning. Can't let your edge slip before plebe year." Just like that, my moment was gone, like it had never happened. Later that night, I placed that medal in a wooden box under my bed. I didn't even want to look at it anymore. It wasn't a trophy, it was a reminder, a symbol of how brilliance, when it came from the wrong person in the Hayes family, could still be invisible. And if you think that moment passed, if you think the years healed it, let me show you how deep the scar runs. Years later, I sat across from my parents at the kitchen table, trying to find the right words. I had just been accepted into naval intelligence. It was a proud moment for me. Grueling tests, psych evals, interviews that left me mentally wrung out. But I'd made it. I was in. I thought maybe, just maybe, this time they'd see me. Instead, my father's first words were intelligence. That's a support role. I swear to you, the way he said support felt like he was spitting out gum that lost its flavor. The Hayes family doesn't do background work. Sophia, we don't push paper, we lead from the front. My mother, bless her eternal effort to keep peace in a war zone, tried to soften the blow. "Maybe it's better this way," she offered with that tight smile. "You're not really built for the combat track. Not built for combat." As if intellect wasn't a form of armor, as if strategy wasn't lethal, as if the very work I'd chosen, reading between encrypted lines, disrupting supply chains, foiling attacks before they happened, wasn't warfare in its own right. They didn't understand that my battlefield just didn't come with blood. But it came with stakes. It came with silence, with shadows, with the knowledge that if I missed one variable, people died. That conversation ended like every other, with Dad muttering about lost potential and Mom reaching for wine. They never asked what I actually did. Never once. Even after my clearance was upgraded, even after my work helped dismantle 2 entire trafficking rings off the African coast, even after I briefed a senior Pentagon liaison on irregular communication intercepts in the Black Sea. But I wasn't surprised, because when a family builds a myth, anything outside it becomes noise. And in the myth of the Hayes family, Ethan was Achilles, and I was the clerk in the background, tallying spears. But what they never realized, what Ethan never saw, was that in my silence, I built something stronger than approval. I built access, I built leverage. And I built a memory. A vault of every insult, every omission, every instance of weaponized neglect. I cataloged it the way I cataloged risk factors on a mission. Which brings me back to Annapolis. Standing there, at that checkpoint, I wasn't just a sister being rejected. I was a soldier taking mental notes. I saw the look on Ethan's face when I was turned away. It wasn't shock. It wasn't discomfort. It was satisfaction. It confirmed what I'd long suspected. He was the one who had removed my name, and he'd done it knowing Mom and Dad would let it slide. And that's when something inside me shifted. It wasn't rage. Rage burns fast. What I felt was colder, quieter. It was calculation. Because here's the part nobody sees about being underestimated, it's the perfect cover. While they're busy celebrating the show pony, they don't notice the architect behind the curtain. And I had built something. Not just a reputation in a classified ops division. Not just relationships with SEAL teams and Joint Task Command. I had built something else. Something I had never intended to use. But now, it was time to open the vault. Because Ethan's pride wasn't the only thing on the line anymore. And I had a plan. ChatGPT'd and I. There's a particular silence that comes with betrayal. It doesn't roar, it doesn't explode. It just seeps, like cold water under a locked door. Quiet. Constant. I felt it in the hours after the Annapolis ceremony, as I sat in the tank with only screens for company. No one knew I had been denied at the gates. No one knew what Ethan said. And I didn't tell anyone, not because I was ashamed, but because I needed the silence. Silence, after all, is the most powerful room in which to plan revenge. The briefing that evening was standard on paper. The operation intercept a rogue transmission suspected to originate from a flagged merchant vessel drifting near Djibouti. At first glance, it looked like nothing a false alarm. A redundant ping. Maybe a fishing boat with a busted radio. But my gut told me otherwise. And my gut, it's never wrong. I stayed late. Everyone else filtered out. A half-eaten protein bar sat forgotten on the corner of my keyboard. And the overhead lights began to dim on a motion timer I hadn't triggered. I was still as a statue, eyes scanning the intercepted metadata, cross-referencing frequencies, and reading between the decimals like they were whispers. Then I saw it. A repeating signature one I hadn't seen in nearly 2 years. The pattern matched a known smuggling route used by a militia group tied to offshore hostage operations. And embedded in the audio burst a phrase spoken in low Somali, distorted by sea static but unmistakable. 12 flames, no light. 12 flames. It was code. Hostages. It meant they were preparing to move. My chest tightened not in fear, but in focus. This was no random scan. It was a window. A narrow, precious window. If we didn't act within 24 hours, they'd be scattered like sand. I sent the alert protocol. Command would dispatch a team. But here's where things got complicated. Ethan's unit had just been redeployed to that region as a face-saving maneuver after a minor media scandal, something about unprofessional conduct during a port call. Nothing big enough to derail him. Of course, just enough to require a strategic photo op. He was now the lead contact for naval liaison in Djibouti, which meant the mission would go through him. And that posed a problem. Not a professional one. I had worked around egos before. No, this was personal. Because I knew exactly what Ethan would do, take credit, butcher the protocol, and compromise lives to make himself look good on camera. He wasn't malicious, just dangerously insecure. The kind of man who, when handed a loaded weapon of praise, would aim it at the mirror. I looked at the screen. 12 lives hung in balance. 12 strangers engineers. Crew. Maybe even a child or two. And here I was, the only one with the full picture, and a decision to make. I could escalate. I could bypass Ethan's channel. Go straight to command with a formal override. But that would trigger a flag. His name would be pulled. An internal inquiry launched. And then the same press that praised him last week would circle like vultures. Which brings us to the real question. Did I want to save those lives? Or save them and dismantle the Hayes myth in one strike? This wasn't about revenge. Not anymore. This was about exposure. Not just of Ethan, but of the entire culture that crowned people like him while sidelining people like me. I didn't just want justice. I wanted clarity. So I made my move. First, I pulled the comms logs. Ethan's unit wasn't due for an intel handoff for another 8 hours. That gave me a window. I drafted a secondary plan with my analyst team, Covert. untraceable, and low light. We'd feed real-time thermal imaging to a SEAL unit I trusted, one that didn't ask questions, only coordinates. But I needed one more piece to make this airtight. A witness. I remembered the petty officer from Annapolis, the one who'd looked at me with that flicker of regret when he had to deny my entry. I ran his ID, Petty Officer Marcus Lynn, freshly assigned to perimeter logistics, clean record, no connections to my family, neutral. I sent him a private, secure message not from my military address, but from a civilian alias I used for whistleblower training modules. All it said was, "Remember the woman you turned away at Annapolis? She's about to save 12 lives you'll read about tomorrow. Watch carefully, then decide who deserves a salute." And I signed it, S. Some might say I was dragging him into a personal war. I wasn't. I was giving him a choice, to see. Because that's all I ever wanted from anyone in my family, not praise, not spotlight, just acknowledgement. The mission proceeded under the radar. The extraction was fast, clean, silent, 12 hostages evacuated, no casualties, the militia cell scattered. But here's where the twist hit. The press coverage. Ethan's name was plastered all over it. Again. Lieutenant Hayes leads successful maritime counter-op. The military PR office had rerouted the credit back to his division. Not out of malice, but routine. The public loves a face, and Ethan had one. My team saw it and scoffed. I said nothing, because the next day, an internal audit report landed on my desk, quiet, confidential. In it, discrepancies in Ethan's unit response times, incomplete cross-channel communications, a time-stamped log showing his team was never actually briefed until hours after the mission succeeded. Someone had submitted the data trail anonymously. I knew who. Marcus Lynn. He had watched, and he had seen. That's when I knew the game had changed. This wasn't just about what my family believed anymore. Now the system had a crack, and I was ready to pry it wide open. ChatGPT deny. The audit was my first breadcrumb, but I knew better than to strike too soon. Precision revenge true, calculated, irrevocable required patience. One slip, and they'd call it bitterness. Emotional instability. A woman lashing out. I'd seen it happen before. No, I would not scream. I would orchestrate. In the weeks following the extraction, I operated in silence. Ethan was riding a wave of public praise. Interviews, speaking engagements. Even a segment on morning news where he talked about maintaining calm under pressure. I watched him use my work as set dressing for his charade, and I let him. Because the higher they fly, the louder they crash. What Ethan didn't know was that I'd already started writing the fall. I began with the internal systems, quiet requests for declassified review, redacted reports, and clearance logs with minor typos that I knew would raise flags in the right inboxes. You don't need to make accusations in my line of work. You just nudge the machine until it investigates itself. At night, I returned to a folder I had long sealed away, a drive labeled Family Archive, tucked inside a generic cloud name. In it, voice memos, calendar screenshots, a breadcrumb trail of every time Ethan or my father had downplayed my work, redirected my credit, or used my silence to lift themselves higher. There was one recording I'd never replayed, a dinner from 4 years back, a birthday, my birthday. We were at Mom's place, roast beef, store-bought cake, the usual parade of passive insults wrapped in family smiles. Midway through the meal, Ethan, half drunk, had leaned over and whispered something just loud enough for my mother to pretend she hadn't heard. You know, if I ever get caught screwing up, I'll just say it was Sophia's op. Everyone knows she's in the shadows. No one will check. I had laughed then, not because it was funny, but because it was so Ethan. I clipped that audio and added it to a new file, payload. The twist: I wasn't just collecting dirt to take him down. I was building something undeniable, a complete, irrefutable story with evidence, context, pattern, and motive. And I wasn't planning to leak it to the press. No. I was going to feed it into the system Ethan worshipped most, the U.S., Navy's own merit machine. It started with a simple request to the Office of Naval Intelligence, a proposal for an internal recognition review of support operatives during Black Ops. The kind of dry bureaucratic initiative no one ever reads unless it disrupts status quo. In the appendix, a case study, redacted names, redacted dates, but the timelines, the metadata, the details. Anyone with access would see the unmistakable shadow of our last mission. And buried in the footnotes a cross-reference to an audit, one already triggered by Marcus Lynn's anonymous tip, one that was about to reappear in the inbox of the Joint Oversight Division. But that was only Phase 1. Phase 2 required Ethan to speak. So I gave him the stage. I reached out to a civilian journalist I trusted, an old college friend who now hosted a niche but well-respected military podcast. I sent her a document, anonymously, and simply wrote, "Interview him. Ask him about the Djibouti mission. Then compare the logs." She did. And Ethan predictably spoke with the confidence of a man who believed himself untouchable. He offered tactical breakdowns that didn't align with the official timeline. He referenced decisions he didn't make. He even claimed credit for the thermal recon coordination, my thermal recon coordination. By the end of the week, the episode had gone modestly viral in defense circles. Nothing big, not headline level, but enough. Because now, whispers were forming, and in our world, whispers matter more than screams. Ethan called me 2 days later. I hadn't heard his voice directly in almost a year. "Hey," he said, like we were catching up between coffees. "You, heard that podcast?" I didn't answer. He cleared his throat. "Look, I think someone's trying to screw with me. They mentioned data discrepancies, thermal stuff. You were in that sector, right?" Still, I said nothing. He got quieter. His voice dipped into something he rarely wore around me, uncertainty. "You think someone's trying to pin something on me from your team? Maybe?" That's when I finally spoke. "You don't need help screwing yourself, Ethan." Long pause. "You mad about the Annapolis thing?" he asked. "Defensive now. I didn't mean for them to keep you out. That was a security oversight." "You had me removed from the list," I said, my voice flat. "Come on. You wanted the spotlight clean. No distractions. No sister in a different uniform reminding everyone whose intel you were using." He didn't deny it. He just sighed. And then he said the line I'd been waiting for. "You don't understand how much pressure I'm under." There it was. The true creed of men like him. The excuse they hand themselves like a badge of suffering. I didn't reply. I just ended the call. Because Phase 3 was already in motion. That same week, an internal Navy communique announced a formal review of field credit protocols led by an external task force. Independent, unbiased, with subpoena power. And guess who they called in for an anonymized debrief? Petty Officer Marcus Lynn. I had played my card. But it wasn't revenge. It was realignment. Because when you spend your life invisible, the moment people start seeing you isn't rage, it's revelation. And Ethan, he was about to discover what that felt like. ChatGPT'd and I. By the time the task force letters went out, the cracks were already visible. I watched it unfold like a conductor listens for a wrong note in the strings, subtle, deliberate, inevitable. Ethan's face was still smiling in press clips, but the edges were beginning to twitch. His interviews had grown shorter. The confident banter replaced by tight, rehearsed lines. Something was shifting, and he knew it. The task force began requesting sworn statements. Internal review officers started interviewing operatives who'd worked under his command. Quiet questions emerged about timelines, radio logs, even basic protocol. Then came the first tremor, a Navy Times op-ed titled, "Hero or Heirloom? The Hidden Cost of Legacy and Uniform." It didn't name him outright, but it didn't need to. Everyone in the community knew who it referenced. A young lieutenant, hailed for a high-profile rescue, now facing questions of credit integrity. Ethan called me again. But this time, I didn't pick up. He left a voicemail. His voice sounded frayed, like a taut rope about to snap. "Sophia, please, I know you're behind this. Just tell me what you want. We can fix it. Okay, I'll talk to command. I'll tell them you helped. Just don't destroy my career. You don't understand what that uniform means to me." That last line almost made me laugh. Because that uniform, the one I'd bled for behind closed doors, meant everything to me. Too. The difference, I never used it as a shield. So I waited. The next move came from a place I didn't expect. My mother. She showed up at my apartment one Sunday morning, unannounced. She hadn't visited me in years. She brought a coffee cake, store-bought, the same kind she used to put out during family brunches, cinnamon crumble, the kind Ethan liked. I didn't invite her in. We stood at the doorway, a breeze tugging at her jacket, her eyes searching mine. "Your brother's not sleeping," she said quietly. I folded my arms. "He's unraveling. Sophia, whatever this is, it's going too far." I raised an eyebrow. Too far or just finally visible? She winced. "He made mistakes, but he's still your brother. And I'm still your daughter," I said. She looked down, not at guilt, at disbelief, as if she hadn't expected me to say it out loud, as if she still forgot. Then she handed me a small envelope. Inside was a photo. Old. A picture of me at 14, sitting at the kitchen table, building what would become my first encryption prototype. Ethan was in the background, looking bored. My father, in mid-conversation, his hand raised like he was explaining something over me. My mother pointed at the image. "I've kept this in my wallet," she whispered. That part oddly stung more than all the insults. "You kept it," I said, my voice sharp, but never showed it. She didn't argue, just said, "You were always the smart one. I just didn't know how to protect that." It wasn't an apology, but it was the closest she'd ever come. She turned to leave but added one final thing. "Whatever you're doing, just don't become what you're trying to punish." The door clicked shut behind her. I stared at the photo for a long time, and for the briefest second, I hesitated. Then I went back to work. Because the final phase required precision and allies. That's when I made contact with the last person Ethan ever expected. Jessica, his wife. We hadn't spoken directly in years. Not since the engagement party where she pulled me aside and whispered, "You're too intense. Lighten up or you'll grow old, bitter, and alone." But people change when the foundation cracks. I reached out through secure back channels, through a third-party courier she used for off-grid vetting when she consulted on international law cases. I sent her the folder audio files, transcripts, timelines. It wasn't blackmail. It was truth. 2 days later, she called. "You've always had the receipts, haven't you?" she said. I stayed silent. Then she sighed. "If I testify, this could ruin him." "No," I replied. "This will show what he really is. The Navy will decide what to do." She hesitated, then asked the one question that had been simmering since the beginning. "Why now, Sophia?" And for the first time, I said it aloud. Because I refused to be erased one more time. Not by him, not by the system, not by silence. The line went quiet. Then Jessica said, "I'll send a statement to the board, but I want one thing in return." "What?" "I want my name taken off the plaque in your parents' house, the one that says perfect couple." We both laughed. Bitter, true. 3 days later, the bomb dropped. Jessica's sworn statement, Marcus Lynn's testimony, the audio file, the logs. And at the center of it all, a new internal memo sent quietly to all naval intelligence officers. Effective immediately. All field credit must be accompanied by time-stamped verification and support staff acknowledgement. It was done. But Ethan didn't fall quietly. He showed up. At my workplace. I hadn't seen him in person since Annapolis. He looked smaller, not physically but spiritually, like the myth had been peeled back, and now only the man remained. We stood in the parking lot, gray sky above, rain misting the air. "You wanted to destroy me," he said. "No," I said, "I wanted you to finally see me." His eyes blue, sharp. Once full of pride blinked once, and for a moment, just a flicker, he did. But before either of us could say another word, my phone buzzed. A security alert. And on the screen, a breach report. Someone had accessed an off-book server. Someone. From my unit. Someone who wasn't Ethan. My stomach dropped. This wasn't over. The security alert wasn't just any blip on my screen. It was a direct hit, a breach from within the heart of my own unit. The realization settled over me like a cold fog. Someone close, someone trusted, had just crossed a line I never thought they would. My hands trembled slightly as I scanned the report. The breach had targeted classified mission files, the kind of information that could cripple operations or worse, end lives. I ran the trace. The digital fingerprints were faint but unmistakable. Someone with high-level clearance. Someone with intimate knowledge of our systems. The last place I expected to find a traitor was here, among my closest team. My mind raced. Who could it be? The quiet analyst who barely spoke at briefings, the tech specialist who always volunteered for night shifts, or perhaps the man who greeted me with a nod every morning but never quite met my eyes. As I pieced it together, the weight of betrayal hit me harder than any enemy I'd faced overseas. This wasn't just about family anymore. This was a war within. I locked down the system, alerted counterintelligence, and prepared to confront the traitor. Meanwhile, Ethan's world was spiraling. The Naval Review Board's findings had been devastating. He was suspended pending investigation, his reputation shattered like broken glass underfoot. Yet, when he reached out for help, it wasn't to me, it was to our father. The same man who had ignored me at the ceremony, who had turned a blind eye to years of silent sacrifice. I overheard their conversation through a channel I had access to, a late-night call filled with desperate promises and bitter regrets. "You've got to pull some strings. Dad, I'm nothing without the family name." Our father's voice was cold. "You made your bed, Ethan, now lie in it." And in that moment, I understood the full depth of the dynasty I had fought against. But amid the chaos, one unexpected ally emerged. Petty Officer Marcus Lynn, the young guard from Annapolis, stepped forward, offering testimony that pierced through the fog of denial. His courage to speak truth shook the ranks and gave weight to the evidence I had carefully compiled. With his help, the task force uncovered a web of mismanagement and favoritism that extended beyond Ethan, implicating senior officers who had protected him for years. Justice was no longer a distant dream. It was unfolding. Yet, as the walls closed in on Ethan and the Hayes legacy, a new threat emerged. An anonymous message appeared on my encrypted phone, simple and chilling. "You're playing a dangerous game. Walk away now, or everyone loses." The sender was unknown. The tone unmistakable. The stakes higher than ever. I looked at the photo from my mother, the symbol of my hidden brilliance, the quiet strength I'd carried alone for years. And I made my choice. This war wasn't over. It was only just beginning. The courtroom was stark, sterile, and unforgiving, a far cry from the warmth of family dinners I once imagined would bridge the growing chasms between us. As I took my seat, the weight of every silent rejection, every dismissed achievement pressed down on my shoulders. Today wasn't just a trial of facts, it was a reckoning of legacy. The room buzzed quietly as lawyers laid out timelines, presented intercepted communications, and played back the voices of betrayal. Marcus Lynn's testimony punctuating the narrative like a hammer on fragile glass. Ethan sat across from me, his uniform now patched with uncertainty. His eyes, once sharp and proud, flickered with a mix of anger, shame, and a desperate search for forgiveness he had long refused to offer me. The judge's gavel brought the room to order, but inside, time seemed to stretch each moment, a thread unraveling years of hidden truths. I remembered the photo my mother had given me, the snapshot of a girl who dared to be different in a family that demanded conformity. That girl had grown into a woman who no longer needed their approval, only their acknowledgement. When my turn came, I spoke not just with facts, but with the quiet strength of someone who had been invisible for too long. I am not here to destroy my brother, I said. I am here to restore what has been denied to all of us, the truth, to show that leadership isn't just about medals or titles, but about integrity, sacrifice, and recognition of every voice in the ranks. The room was silent, and then, slowly, heads began to nod. In the days that followed, the verdict rippled through the Navy and my family. Ethan was reassigned to a non-command role pending further review. Policies were updated to protect the contributions of support officers like me. But the real victory wasn't in the orders signed or the press releases. It was in the legacy reclaimed. I stood outside the family home months later, the weight of years lifting with the dawn. My mother greeted me with a tentative smile. Not perfect, but real. My father, eyes softened, spoke quietly about pride not just in Ethan, but in me. I realized then that justice isn't always loud or immediate. Sometimes, it's the slow rebuilding of trust, the acknowledgement of unseen battles, and the courage to be unapologetically yourself. And as I turned away from the porch, the sun casting long shadows behind me, I knew this story was far from over. Because legacy isn't just what we inherit, it's what we choose to leave behind. If you've ever felt overlooked, underestimated, or erased, remember your truth matters. Stand firm, speak loud, and never let anyone define your worth. Thank you for joining me on this journey. Please like, comment your story below, and subscribe for more stories of resilience and justice. Until next time, stay strong.